Welcome to the Babbles Nonsense podcast, where I'm your host, Jonna Grimes, and we're here to discuss any and all things, but especially the shit that I want to talk about. Because let's face it, I have a lot of shit to say, and after all, you are listening to my verbal diary. Let's get started. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another podcast. To be quite frank, I appreciate all the questions coming in on the Instagram posts that I did. This is just going to be a Q&A episode. Number one, because I didn't have a guest planned, because my schedule is all over the place and I honestly just haven't been able to reach out to anyone. Also, Lauren is on vacation, so she wasn't able to be here with me. So I was just like, you know what? Why not do a Q&A? I've thrown it up on my Instagram before, and Lauren even suggested it. So I was like, sure, why not? I'm pretty transparent, so we're just going to kind of jump on in. I tried to categorize, if that's the right word, I don't fucking know, these into different things because I had a few kind of about the podcast and then about my nutrition stuff and then some personal stuff. So I'm going to start with the podcast questions. So if these were your questions, then try to listen in and you will get your question answered. And if you don't really care anything about me, then maybe this isn't the episode for you and skip it. So yeah, let's dive on in. So first question, why did you start a podcast? The initial reason I started a podcast was during the pandemic. I kind of got into listening to podcasts myself, and I just find them very interesting because it gives you a platform to kind of just say what you need to say and what you want to say. And if you know me, then you know I definitely have a lot to say. And I don't really hold back, so I'm very transparent usually. But I also have social anxiety, so I thought, I really need to step out of my comfort zone. I never really go out unless my friends go out, and then even if I do go out, I don't talk to new people. So it kind of started out where this would give me the opportunity to talk to new people if that's something I wanted to do, and I could just, get on Instagram, text some people, and then just kind of highlight them, get to know people, and maybe heal my social anxiety a little bit, which it really has helped. Like, I'm more comfortable talking to new people now, whereas before I wasn't. And then it's kind of just an icebreaker. It's like, hey, you're a really cool person. You have a really cool story. Do you want to be on my podcast? And things like that. So that is why I started a podcast. Second question was, who is your favorite guest so far? And this is really hard because everyone has been such an amazing guest and so fun to interview, and a lot of them are my friends. But I would have to say my most favorite so far was probably Kristen and Andy Bernard with Cote de Femme, because it was just a very interesting vibe. We went to their house to interview them. We got to taste their wine. And then afterwards, when the mic stopped, we got to know them a little bit more personal and then just have a good time at their house. So that was probably my favorite guest to interview just because the interaction was so much fun. But everyone has been a gem so far. Third question. Any future guests that you want, like if the sky was the limit? Of course. I used to really think that I would want celebrities on my podcast. And even though I'm about to say some celebrities, they're not really like celebrities, what you think of like musicians or, what would you say, like movie stars. They're more so just down to earth people, but they do have a big platform. Like number one, absolutely would want the Skinny Confidential on my podcast. If y'all don't know her, I started listening to her podcast, The Skinny Confidential, Him and Her, and she is just full of knowledge. She knows a lot about a lot, and I just think the way she carries herself and the way she presents her information is just really cool. So check her out. I would definitely love to have her, and then obviously all of my Vanderpump people that I'm obsessed with, like Stassi, Lala, Sheena Shea, Katie Maloney, definitely all of them. Love them. Would love to ask them several different questions. The Skinny But Not Fat. Who else do I follow on Instagram that I just think is super cool? Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Celebrity wise, I don't know that I actually have any questions for some celebrities other than Britney Spears because of everything that is going on in her life right now. Oh, Nina Parker off of the Nightly Pop on E. Love her. She is so funny, and she just developed her own clothing line. So I would love to have her for sure on my podcast. So those are a few. The fourth question, why did you change the course of the podcast? So if y'all have been listening to the podcast from the beginning, you know that I started out kind of interviewing businesses, and then it kind of, not that I didn't want to do that, but it kind of shifted to try to incorporate more of my life. So when I started the podcast, it really was to be more like a verbal diary for me to have a place to go to and just talk about issues that really needed to be talked about or that were bothering me, to give me an outlet. I've never been the type of person who likes to journal. Like, I kept journals when I was little, yeah, but like I've always been really good about talking about my issues or my problems, and kind of just love getting different perspectives from different views of life. So that's what the podcast was initially supposed to be about anyways, and then it kind of just turned into interviewing my friends because they have businesses, because I found out that trying to podcast solo and talk to yourself in a room was very hard. It's getting easier the longer I do it. But it was just very hard, and it was fun to have someone to bounce off of. But it did start with things that I was interested in with my friends who had businesses. And then once that kind of started, other people who had businesses in Huntsville kind of reached out and wanted to be on the podcast, which is fine, which is cool. You know, it started that way. So I'm kind of intermixing the two now. It's more like personal stuff and then businesses that I have an affiliation with or that I want to know more about in general. So kind of like that. So it's not really changed. I would say it's more just intermixing the whole verbal diary aspect with other guests, if that makes sense. All right. Next question. Aren't you worried about sharing too much on the podcast? Not really. I think the only thing that I have to worry about is that I am in a professional role in my day job, and I have to be careful on what I say so that I don't make my company look bad, or I don't say something too controversial. God, guys, I cannot speak. But not really. I'm a pretty transparent person, and I talk about my life in general. Like, if people come up to me and ask me about myself, then I pretty much tell them. I'm kind of an open book. So not really concerned too much about sharing too much about my personal life. I do worry sometimes when I put stuff out, like I'm like, oh, should I say that? Because people don't know a lot about me. So it kind of gets nerve-wracking, I guess. I'm not scared to share it. It just kind of makes me nervous when I put it out how people will respond. Because you never know. Some people may love what I say and then other people won't. Like, for example, when I talked about my body issues, it did concern me a little bit about like to put that out because I'm not like, I know I'm still a small person and I didn't want people to be like, seriously, Jonna, you have these issues. But I actually had a really good response. I had people reach out and say that, they felt the same way too. So that was really cool. Next question. How did Lauren get involved in co-hosting? So this is really cool. So Lauren and I actually went to high school together. We knew of each other. We never really hung out in the same groups or talked a lot. But then I found out she was in Huntsville. And of course, it was when I was doing small businesses. And then I was wanting to get more into the mental health side of things. And she was a life coach and she opened up a salon. So I was like, oh, this would be the perfect time to interview her to kind of get a mix of different things. And I just loved the way we vibed. And she was initially going to do a podcast as well. So I was like, you know what? Why don't we just kind of co-host together? Because I love how we bounce off of each other. And I think that you pull things out in me that maybe I wouldn't have talked about and vice versa. And it's just been a great mix since. And I love having her co-hosting because she is thebomb.com. Anyways, moving on. You mentioned, this is the next question. You mentioned having a sponsor. How did that come about? And are there any more sponsors coming in? So after doing the wine podcast, Côte de Femme, with Andy and Kristen Bernard, we kind of discussed it. And I was like, would you care if I mentioned that you are the official sponsors of the podcast? Because I absolutely do adore your wine. And I think everyone in Huntsville should try it. And since this is kind of a local podcast, they were super down for it. So they have just been amazing. We did a giveaway with them. Kristen was absolutely fabulous with that. We're going to try to do more giveaways with businesses in the future, and just kind of giveaways in general. So no other sponsors so far have come in, but I do kind of have some codes that I will be able to give out on the podcast with things that I'm starting to get affiliated with. So one will be Frey Skincare that I absolutely love and adore. I've sent it out as gifts to multiple friends of mine because it's a skincare line that's organic, cruelty-free, super clean product, and they give back to their community. And it is a woman-owned business. But it also is designed for women's skin that's sweats. So if you work out or you're just sweaty, like if you all my girls in the hospital, like the masks make you sweaty, this is designed to help you not break out. And it truly does help. I've noticed, like, when I try to wear my mineral sunscreen or just, that's not Frey, I do break out when I sweat. So I will be talking more about that. Guys, my life has been just so crazy busy lately, which we'll all talk about that on episodes to come. And I need to just do an episode about Frey because I love it. I'm definitely not a skin expert. That's why I go to my esthetician, but I'm learning all about Frey through them. I've already loved their products. I've already been purchasing their products and using their products, but now I get to be an ambassador for them. So if you want to jump over to their website, frey.com, you can definitely check out anything and use my code Babbles, or you can check my link in my Instagram and click on the Frey link and use my code and get 25% off of your purchase. So that's just kind of like a code I have for y'all. They're not a sponsor of the podcast, but that's something. And then also, if you're local or if you know anything about Discount Divas, they've also opened up like a referral code line, and let me get my email opened and I will give y'all my code for that. And then we will talk more about all of this in general on future podcast. Give me 1 second. Okay. So if you know Discount Divas and you have been a member of them, or if you're new to them, you can definitely get 20% off your first order if you haven't shopped with them before with Babbles 20 REF. So it's like reference. So Babbles 20 REF. So those are some codes. But yes, Côte de Femme is one of the sponsors, and you will hear more about them. And next question: how did you start a podcast? Or how do you start a podcast? So a lot of YouTube. No, I'm very fortunate that I have a mentor who is also my personal trainer, Annie Miller, who I hope to get on this podcast. That would be another one from the question earlier for future guests that you want. She's just so full of knowledge when it comes to fitness and business. No, she had a podcast already out and it's doing very well. So I just texted her and I was like, hey, can you help me, lead me in the right direction? Like, this is actually harder than I thought. I thought you could just get a mic, record it, and, upload it to iTunes or whatever. No, not the case. You have to have a host, and there's so many hosts to choose from. And then you have to have like a platform to get your RSS feed out. So I just YouTube how to start a podcast, and there are so many ways to help. All right. And then the last question someone submitted about the podcast was, do you have any podcasts that you listen to or look up to? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, The Skinny Confidential, Him and Her with Lauren Bostic and Michael Everett, love them. The way they podcast to me is just like kind of amazing. Like the way they produce it, whenever they do their sponsors or their commercials, like there's a little blip of music so that you know it's coming. So if you don't want to listen to it, you can just skip through it. I like how they give like a little snippet of the clip ahead, so it kind of keeps you interested in what's to come. And then they give you a very good background before it even starts. So if you're like, yeah, it's not my thing, I don't want to listen to it, then you know not to listen to it and you haven't wasted your time. But she just goes there. Like, she will ask any and every question, and I just think her voice, like, you just want to listen to it. So love her. I also listen to You're Gonna Love Me by Katie Maloney, just because I love her to death. The Thyroid Fixer podcast with Dr. Amy Horniman, just because I'm super nerd over here and love everything about the thyroid and need to know about it. Also listen to Coffee Convos podcast with, oh God, why am I going to blank on this? Kale Lowry and Lindsay Chrisley. Sorry, Jesus Christ. And they just kind of talk about things with their kids, but I also watch her on Teen Mom. And then Lauren Bostic also just came out with a podcast called Get the Fuck Out of the Sun, and she gives you everything skincare that you ever wanted to know or didn't even think you wanted to know. I listened to Probably a Podcast by Shannon Ford, The Blonde Files, Give Them Lala with Randall, Not Skinny But Not Fat, Unwaxed, and then the Fitzbro podcast with Annie Miller. I was listening to the Babbles podcast, but they've been off air since April, and I don't know if it's coming back, and definitely listened to Straight Up with Stassi. So those are kind of what I look up to and how I'd want my podcast to go, because I think that they are just fabulous in how they direct it. It's kind of funny, lighthearted, some of it's knowledgeable, but it's very entertaining, doesn't get you bored or doesn't make you bored, and you don't want to turn it off. So those are the podcasts I listen to. So thank you for all of those who just asked all the podcast questions. So I'm kind of going to go into the next set of questions, which were the personal questions. And if these were your questions, listen out. So the first question was, what do you do for work? You always say it shall remain nameless. So I'm a nurse practitioner in an ER currently. I've actually just accepted a new position elsewhere, which I know I keep saying I'm going to talk about this in future episodes, but I don't want to give too many details away about that, as it's very, very new. And I'll be transitioning into that in the next couple of months. That's why I've kind of been busy lately. But I always say it will remain nameless, because I don't want to put my company's name out there when they have nothing to do with the podcast that I'm promoting or saying, and I don't want it to be controversial. God, why can't I say that word? I don't know, for them. So that's why I say that. But yes, I'm a nurse practitioner. I've been doing that for 6 years, and I also worked in that same ER for 5 years. So I've been a nurse for 11 years now, if you can believe it. Okay. Where are you from? Well, if you haven't been able to tell from my accent, I'm Southern as can be, even though I don't think I have an accent, but my friends tell me otherwise. I'm actually from Winchester, Tennessee. It is a very, very, very small town, but I have lived in Huntsville, Alabama since I was, I think I moved here when I was 19. And then I did move to Nashville for a year, for a job at Vanderbilt, but then moved back to Huntsville. So I've lived in 3 different places, but I'm from Winchester, Tennessee. Next question. Are you dating? Question I get asked all the fucking time. No, I'm sorry if this is your question. I'm currently not dating. And the reason is, number one, because I hate dating apps. They literally annoy the shit out of me. I don't know if you're single or if you're dating out there, but somebody tell me how to meet people organically, because it's just not happening. I mean, dating apps just annoy me because people can't be original. They say stupid shit and then I get annoyed, but maybe it's just because I'm annoyed all the time anyways, because I'm tired from my job, and hopefully that'll change. Who knows? But I'm not opposed to dating people. I'm just like, I want it to happen organically. Like, can we meet at the gym, the grocery store, like run into my car and we have a wreck, but have a connection. Just kidding. Don't run into my car. Yeah. So there's that. Next question. What autoimmune disease do you have again? I mentioned this before briefly. I don't talk about it a lot, but I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is where antibodies attack your thyroid. So it essentially just makes your thyroid not work. And if you don't know much about the thyroid, then there is a podcast that I have released several episodes ago. I can't really exactly remember the number. Or you can listen to the Thyroid Fixer podcast with Dr. Amy Horniman. She gives a lot of details on that. But yeah, essentially my thyroid doesn't work, which controls everything from metabolism, mood, weight, your hair, skin, nails, everything. It's your master gland. And it essentially just annoys the shit out of me. But go listen back. I've talked about that podcast and everything in that podcast. So next question. Why do you talk so much about the thyroid? Well, as I just mentioned, I do have an autoimmune disease against my thyroid, but it also took me a really long time to figure out what was going on with my body and my hormones, because no doctor really wanted to listen to me. So it took me a long time to find a doctor that actually listened to me. Shout out to Carrie. And actually didn't just look at me as lab values. They actually listened to my symptoms and dosed my medication upon that, which thyroid is so undertreated. So I'm very passionate about it when people maybe having thyroid problems, but their doctor doesn't really give all the testing for it, like your free T3, free T4, TPO, thyroid, thyroglobulin antibodies, your TSH, reverse T3, fasting insulin, ferritin, all those things can be affected by the thyroid. So it just annoys me to no end when a doctor doesn't listen to someone, or if you come in and they only want to prescribe you a T4 medication and not a T3, which we all know T3 is the active form of the thyroid, and it's going to help with the things like depression and hair loss and, thin hair, brittle nails, dry skin, cold intolerance, weight gain. Because T4 sometimes can't be converted to T3, even though some doctors refuse to believe this new research. So that is why I'm so passionate about it. It's just so undertreated and doctors just don't listen. So if you're having any of these issues, I definitely encourage you to go listen to that podcast episode with Carrie where she talks about the thyroid, and then I kind of talk about my personal journey with my thyroid and how to get a doctor to listen to you. So, next question was, what plastic surgeries have you had done? So, I've only had I had breast implants when I was 22, and then one displaced, so I had to have them fixed 5 years later, and then I decided just to remove them altogether because I didn't feel like they fit my body anymore, and I was getting more into athleticism and things like that, and I just felt like they were too big. And then I also kind of researched about breast implant illness, and I didn't know if that was what offset my autoimmune disease. So I've only ever had that done. I'm not going to say that I haven't ever thought about getting lower abdominal liposuction, and I know people are probably going to roll their eyes but no one knows what I look like naked, okay? I had gained 20 pounds pretty fast when I did get diagnosed with my thyroid stuff. So there is some areas that you cannot spot reduce. We all know that. And yeah, I'm not going to lie. I've thought about it, and who knows? Maybe I'll do it one day and I'll share it on the podcast. But I do have a friend that actually did have abdominal liposuction that said that she would be willing to come on the podcast and talk about her experience. And I cannot wait for that episode because I know a lot of people on the body image. When I did put up a Q&A for the Instagram, actually more people said that they would be interested in liposuction. So she's going to talk about that on an upcoming podcast. So stay tuned for that. And last question for the personal stuff. What filler have you had done? All right. So for the longest time, I actually tried to hide the fact that I had filler, which was stupid in my part, but it was like so taboo in the South. It wasn't as acceptable, I guess. Like people were like, oh my God, why would you do that? Whatever. But the more I've become more confident in myself and I don't really care what people think about me as much anymore, I tell them. So I have had lip filler, and then my laugh lines filled. I did try under eye filler at one time, but I had a horrible reaction, so we dissolved it. So that's in another podcast in itself. Like my body just hates everything. It rejects everything. So that was a bad reaction I had. And so we dissolved it, and then it left me with a little bit of malar mounds that I have, going back to the plastic surgery, I have talked with a plastic surgeon about possible eyelid surgery. I don't know. We'll see. So that's all the personal questions. And then I did have a few nutrition questions because if you didn't know, I am a nutrition coach and I have a separate Instagram for that, which is macrosby_J. And the first question was, are you still doing nutrition coaching? I noticed you haven't been posting in a while. So, yes, I'm still nutrition coaching. So, if you do need a nutrition coach, like macro coaching, or want to change how you're eating habits or anything like that, you can definitely reach out to me on my personal page, which is Babbles_nonsense. I still answer DMs on the macros by _J, and I do answer macrosbyj@gmail.com. But I haven't been posting again because my life has been crazy. I've been working 13-hour shifts a week at the hospital. And then on my off days, I've been trying to get some podcasts done and trying to learn about this ambassadorship, trying to get my sponsorships going, switching jobs. It's just been a lot, guys. So I haven't really decided if I want to go back to my macro page because I'm kind of shifting gears on how I think about things. I personally have gained weight myself, not because of anything other than my hormones, and I've just kind of taken a break from strictly macro counting, which is fine. I don't know how I feel currently about how the nutrition world is going, and it was just kind of giving me this negative vibes, even though I still want to help people on their journey, but I also want people to feel comfortable with how they are now. And I want people to love how they are now because that's what I'm trying to work on with myself. But yes, long answer for that was yes, I'm still nutrition coaching, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me for that. How did I get into nutrition? Well, this all started when I started gaining baby weight in high school, and I noticed that my friends weren't. And then when I did develop my autoimmune disease, I knew that I had to eat better. And so I've read like a ton amount of books, and then I don't know, it just kind of developed from there. I also have a podcast on this. I should have looked up the podcast numbers before I sat down to do this to reference. So, I mean, I obviously only have like 30 something episodes, so it's not hard to find, but I did do a nutrition podcast. And then how do you calculate macros? Well, this is a very open-ended question, so I'm not going to be able to give you the direct response, but a lot goes into it. It's not like a calculator that you're generated online. It's your height, your weight, what your goals are. Do you have any hormone issues? Do you need to reverse diet? Have you been dieting so long that you've now, kind of made your metabolism malfunction, and we need to work on your metabolism before we work on like fat loss or things like that. And it's just kind of independent. Like, do you want to do more keto versus, I don't really like keto. I'm saying like a higher fat diet versus a higher carb diet. Are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? Are you paleo? Like, there's so much that goes on into it that I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but you can DM me and we can talk about it a little bit more. Next question. Why do you prefer to give macros over calories? To me, macros makes more sense. It is definitely more hard to do because you're having to look at 3 different things, your protein, carbs, and fat versus just calories. But think about it this way. If you're given, and I'm just going to make it super easy, a 2,000 calorie diet, and you could eat anything you want, maybe one day you're eating 20 grams of fat and 350 grams of carb and then whatever protein, but then the next day you're eating like no carbs, more fat. It's kind of different every day. So your body doesn't know how to utilize these things. So when we kind of go over, there's an intake questionnaire that I do that's like 3 pages long, I think, that kind of, you tell me your activity, what you have currently been eating and things. So when you kind of get your body stabilized on a certain amount, like if it's 175 grams of carbs, 65 grams of fat, and 120 grams of protein, then you know how much you're intaking every day of those things. And if you take in those things every day like you're supposed to, then the calories always come out the same. So I just think it's more individualized and more personalized to get you to a certain goal, kind of body composition goal versus just a weight loss goal, if that makes sense. Both work, but it depends on your goals. So you mentioned being gluten-free. Is that hard for you, and why do you eat that way? So I started going gluten-free probably 5 years now because I also am iron deficient. I don't absorb iron for whatever reason. Again, my body is weird. And so I went to a hematologist that tested me for celiac disease, which I wasn't celiac yet, but if you have one autoimmune disorder, you can develop others because you have antibodies now to destroy certain tissues. So my antibodies can choose, like once my thyroid gland is destroyed, that they want to destroy something else, whether that be my stomach, which would develop Crohn's disease, my hair, which would be alopecia, or my gut, which could be celiac disease. So I choose to eat gluten-free because they say that gluten is very inflammatory to the body, especially in America, because we crossbreed everything and hyperbreed everything. And it's just this frankenfood that your body doesn't even recognize. So I try my best to do gluten-free. Now, there are days, some days that I do not eat gluten-free. Like if I'm at Disney World with my friends and I want a Mickey pretzel. It just depends on my mood, like how long I've been doing it. But mostly for my autoimmune disease. And it's really not that hard. I've never been a big bread eater. And there are so many gluten-free things now that you can have. But just because it says gluten-free does not mean it's healthy. It could be filled full of filler and it could be junk. So yeah, it's really not that hard for me because I basically do fruits, vegetables, and things like that, produce. And then last question I have is, what do you typically eat in a day? This is hard to answer because it's really not that hard. I'm a creature of habit, and since I don't have a family to cook for, it's super easy to kind of eat the same thing. I make these oatmeal pancakes, which I have the recipe on my Macros by Jay Instagram, with eggs, avocado, and then I do rice cakes and avocado. And then I always, for lunch and dinner, have a meat and 2 veggies, and one of those veggies is always a green veggie. And then if I have enough macros left over, I'll do like an apple or a protein cookie or something like that. So super not hard. I'm just a creature of habit, and I don't mind eating the same thing 3 days in a row. But that is all the questions. I'm super happy that y'all asked all of those, and I hope everyone got their question answered. But yeah, so be on the lookout for some future episodes with my friend Ivy, Lauren, some future guests that I'm going to have lined up. My sister has agreed to do the podcast to kind of talk about her business. And y'all know I've mentioned her before about how she used to be addicted to alcohol and how we're trying to rebuild our relationship later in life. So yeah, that is all for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, until next time, bye.